voters for putting this on the ballot now?
Very question, right? Even if you thought this was a good idea, wouldn't you want to have a solid transportation study? Wouldn't you want to have an environmental study done? Wouldn't you want to know whether the state and the feds are even going to put in a nickel into this thing before you go to the taxpayers for this kind of commitment? I could not agree with you more. It is very puzzling to us why they want to rush this through. The only answer we've gotten is that they think if the voters approve this, this gives them somehow leverage in seeking state and federal support. That's not our understanding in talking to state.
So if voters decide to stop this plan, will whatever entity is wanting to put this in, will they try to find another way to weasel their plan in somehow, like through litigation, through some more lobbying? I don't know, like just some shady scheme, you think, or
Let me
like?
try to answer that from kind of the same perspective that we were just talking about. So there's really, CDOT has two levels of control. So CDOT owns I-70, right? Federal highways, CDOT maintains it. It's a state and federal entity. We cannot access it without their explicit approval and acceptance. And so there's two things. Will they approve it and will they fund it? There's no indication that they would fund it. It goes against all of their initiatives to reduce vehicle miles traveled and their safety concerns. As it is right now, they will not. So funding it is one thing, but approval is different. And right now, they will not approve it as it is. And so if taxpayers voted it down, there would still be the same process that would have to be undertaken, and there would have to be significant changes in order to meet the safety and greenhouse gas requirements of CDOT. But that gets so much more complicated because even if they could accomplish all that, then they'd have to fix still Patterson. And that's quite the project for a developer to undertake. But yeah, they could continue to pursue it. It wouldn't change any of the dynamics of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they would pay attention to the voter, right? Here, that no vote could say to the council to basically say, our intergovernmental agreement was contingent upon passage by the voters. That didn't happen, so we're going to use this money for something else.
Okay.
I hope that's what happens, honestly. But Dennis, I don't know.
The politics of this in the city council is kind of interesting. We have three of us that are, our third one isn't here, but there's 3 out of 7 that are very much opposed to this for all the reasons you've heard. And there's one who's very much in favor of it, and heard his name mentioned around here, is Cody Kennedy. The other 3 out of the 7 have said, we just want the voters to decide. We don't even know whether we're going to vote yes or no ourselves. And that's kind of a cop-out. And it's at best lukewarm support for a project that we're spending this much money, we should have way more than one council member in favor of it. And if you'll notice, there's only one county commissioner that's out talking as well. It's Cody Davis. And you have not heard from the 2 ladies who are commissioners. And it's probably similar to why Abe and Anna and Randall are not out talking about it in support, is because they really know this is a bad project. But it's politically necessary in their minds to put it on the ballot. We didn't have to put it on the ballot. They tried to get this on the ballot 2 years ago, maybe 1 year ago. And we had 4 votes in the city to say no. And one of them, Randall, got appointed to the committee that's analyzing this, so he decided he'd be in favor and switch. Now, lately, he's gone back to saying, I'm not necessarily in favor, but I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I'm neutral, which is, like I say, not where our city council people ought to be.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to do the inverse of his question. The voters approve it. What hurdles does it then have? Is it a foregone conclusion at that point that it's not an if, it's a when? Or what are the other steps?
I'll talk about it from a finance perspective, and the answer to that is no, primarily because costs are going to go up. Yeah, I don't see how this gets done with any hope of CDOT approval unless changes are made that are going to significantly add cost to the project. And then the question is, how's that going to get paid for? So I think that is a potential showstopper at either the city or the county level when the final price tag gets done. They have to do an environmental study and demonstrate that they've mitigated the environmental impacts on this thing. I think there's some interesting questions that potentially could get raised as a part of that. And then the transportation ones I'll let Kari talk about, but there are significant redesign that may have to happen here in order to get CDOT approval, even if the state or the feds don't put on any money. Again, likely to drive a lot of costs up and take time.
So right now, we know CDOT said, okay, in order to get this thing approved, here are 3 different ways that you could reduce those injuries and deaths on I-70. Here's a $32 million option, a higher option, and a $40 million option. I just don't remember what that middle one was. And so we have CDOT's, existing or previous proposals about how to make this possible. So again, even if we voted for it, we cannot get approval until we start to change things. And then how much is that going to cost? How would we ever fund that? And that's all unclear.
Would like to refer back to my brainstorm with regards to private sector / doing a toll road for this. There are other entities that have found that to be a legitimate profit motive and a reasonable solution to the dealing with accessing private land for development. And I think that's really kind of at the crux of this, and nobody really wants to talk about the elephant in the room.
I know nothing about toll roads. I know when C-470 was put in, which is the only major toll road, I think, in the state.
Oh, but they're all over the Denver metro area.
Correct, but that required, I think, a vote and, kind of special
Do you feel like that might be
dispensation
more-
from the feds.
Do you feel like that might be a more palatable solution to this issue as opposed to putting the burden of debt on the
I
citizens?
just couldn't tell you. That's something.
Scott, do you
I
have
don't
any
know
comment?
about.
I brought that up.
Oh.
I brought that up, not to you, but in a city county meeting about this whole thing, we were questioning some of the stuff that, it's actually the meeting when some of these things came out, that rainbows and butterflies, right? And it's like, wait a minute, shouldn't the voters know both sides of the issue? And it absolutely was not being presented that way. But I brought up to the city and county together, I said, why don't we look at a toll road on this? Has that ever been explored? Because certainly if it's that valuable to people in the area, they would be happy to pay 50 cents or $1 to use it. And that was poo-pooed right away. So it wasn't taken seriously. But
Do you think it's because there's just not that perspective and familiarity with that option on this side of the state?
No, I think they want total control for the economic development piece on the north side, which is really what this issue has become.
Right.
I mean, it transitioned from a transportation thing to an economic development thing. And I really appreciate you guys being here because we have worked in that neighborhood a little bit and knocked on doors. And the misconception was that the city is going to put up a big sound barrier on both sides of the road. And I reached out to our transportation guy. No, we are not going to do that. It's not in the budget. And it's not possible because there's so many entries to 29 Road. A sound barrier has to have at least a half a mile, I think, of unobstructed entrances. So that is absolutely not going to happen. And for some of the people, as you well know, on the 29 Road corridor, it is going to be in their backyard. I mean, literally. I also, I Googled, been downtown on and off for years and get the train whistles get loud at night, much more than during the day. So I did a little Googling about why sound travels different at night. And sound during the day goes up because of heat and light. Sound at night travels with the horizon. and becomes much louder. So for people in those neighborhoods, I mean, I'm afraid to say, but I think there's going to be a real decrease in property values around that. And with that comes a transition to commercial properties along there, which are not good jobs as they're, painting this whole thing to be economic development. And I've pushed back on this for 8 years. I was a member of Chamber of Commerce previously before I got on council, and it came up periodically on there, and I knew that neighborhood. I knew that road, and it's like, how could we do that to the people? Between Moab and Denver, there are no interchanges that go into a residential area. None. There's a reason for that. I brought that up, and our mayor just pushed back and said, well, any kind of economic development encroaches on residences sometimes. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is a lot of people up there, and it's a danger to people the kids going to school. You can't cross the road to get your kid to a park. Kids on bikes, forget it. I mean, they're absolutely not going to be as safely. And the whole impetus is to speed up traffic and move things along. Well, there's Patterson intersection, which we already know is going to be a disaster. Then there's 2 school zones that go to 25 miles an hour. Then there's actually 3 roundabouts in this plan that will slow down. So tell me where we're going to increase speeds and efficiency on getting people out of here. And those questions are not being answered.
There are studies showing that property values in the toll road. Property values in rural areas do decrease when you put in a beltway nearby. I think that's particularly important because on the west of 29 Road, the Hispanic population is 7%. On the east, it's 30%. And there are many, every state and large metropolitan area has been dealing with the impacts of segregating lower income, more diverse populations, and they've all kind of been going the opposite direction of trying to figure out how to reconnect them, and we are trying to figure out how to disconnect them. Obviously, that's not the goal. And we know that it will impact property values. We suspect that it will. That's what studies show. About the toll road, so there's not a lot of rural, this is rural, I know that it's metropolitan for us, but it would be a rural toll road. And I'm not familiar with the success of those. I think that they're typically probably not done. But it would have to be an entity. It would have to be an entity that did that because there's no way the developer could invest this much money and recover it.
Yeah, and just doing the basic math. So, right, even if this project is an $80 million project, the payback's 173 over 30 years. It's about $9 million in debt service a year for 30 years. That's thrown off a pretty good cash flow just to pay your debt service, let alone other costs associated with running a toll road. So I'd have to do the math. And again, I'm no expert on toll roads, but Kari's point is there's probably just not enough traffic to make it viable. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I understand this is an old plan. I did a little research, and is Kari still here? She just stepped out. Okay, so, well then Scott, you've been around. What was the original intent? I know it was to make traffic flow and the river was part of the original plan. Is this a still vital, important part of that plan, or am I don't get
I'll
it.
answer for CDOT. They would say no. They would say the traffic loop is the I-70 business loop, of which they are spending millions of dollars now improving. If you've seen the construction, right? That's what the first grand investment was about. Now they're working their way south, 32 Road, right? So from CDOT's perspective, the loop around Grand Junction is the I-70 business loop, right? The old notion of a loop around Grand Junction, again, dates back to when Fruitvale was agricultural, right? It's not anymore. Anybody who thought about this 50 years ago saw a very different, right?
Okay. So we're not missing
area.
the piece, the really vital piece.
My personal opinion is no, but certainly, this is not the direction that any metropolitan area is going currently in terms of expanding highway loops, right? The direction is going the other way. In fact, the place that I used to live back in New York actually got rid of some transportation loops and turned them into pedestrian overpasses so they could access riverfront.
50 years ago, Patterson wasn't even a throughway. I moved here in '81, Patterson
Right.
was 2 lanes.
Right. Right.
Is there any thought to making you talk about traffic flow, what about F&a-half road? F&a-half road, if it, between 29 and a half road and 30 road, if that little chunk right there existed, it would do a lot. I mean, there are 4 elementary schools. If those people could go one direction instead of just all down, up and down Patterson. I am the very first house on the west side of Patterson. We don't even know what this is going to mean for us. When I look at where they have mapped it out, where the fire hydrants are, that sidewalk will be 10 feet from my house, 10 feet.
Right.
So I'd like to know, is it going to be 108?
The simple dimensions.
Right, is 110 feet 5 lanes? Not going to happen.
And you raise an important point, right, which is we're investing this amount of money in one project when we could be using that for a lot of small projects, right? Including improving our existing roads.
Right, and what was the first study that was done, the EL study? What'd that cost? $2 million?
Yep.
What's that study going to cost? How long are they going to dump money? Where's that money come from?
Yes, exactly.
You had a question?
And who's doing the study? They're not even from here.
Oh, you had mentioned something about a frontage road, and I just wanted you to talk, you mentioned something about a frontage road instead of an
Well,
interchange.
so if you were interested in just developing land
Right.
out by the airport, and that could stretch north of I-70, right?
Yeah.
One idea to look at, right, is to run a frontage road on the north side of I-70. There are pieces of it right now, some of it's dirt, some of it's paved. But, right, there are other ways to access that property
Right.
without building an interchange. The problem, of course, is, it's not convenient for trucks and transport and whatever else that people seem to envision developing that.
Okay.
But there are other ideas to be explored. And again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but you see the use of frontage roads a lot along interstates.
So I had one last question, really, kind of playing devil's advocate here. Do we have any idea how much income the development would bring in to offset the cost? Is there any estimate that we can look at and see?
Yeah, no, I have no idea. I have no idea. Other than it's a significant amount of acreage, both that's owned by the airport authority and owned by an entity called N70 Tech, which is primarily one landowner. It's a couple hundred acres. So why aren't we focusing our economic development on the places we've already made the investment instead of making a third investment that will sit for who knows how long or cannibalize the two investments we've already made? I think that's an absolutely legitimate question to ask. Kari did a quick analysis, and Scott, do you remember the number? It's well over 200 sites that are already zoned industrial commercial, and that means they've got, the utilities there and they're ready to go.
This is 24 right
Yeah, all over the county. So it's not like we don't have a shortage of shovel-ready sites to do development right now.
If I could. So your question was my first question a year ago when this whole thing came up. It's like, okay, what's the plan? What's the plan for the economic development piece? What are we going to bring in? Well, the county, GJEP, the chamber, and the city have no plan. I mean, literally no plan. So I was chastised for asking such an arrogant question to these groups. And I was like, wait a minute. Oh, and they said, this will be like Riverside. This will be like Riverside. We built the road and then the infill starts coming in. Well, Riverside was built 16, 18 years ago. And we all know what's down there now. We've got the amphitheater, we've got the butterfly pond, got some condos. We maybe have 3 tax-paying entities down there right now. So the ROI is very far down the road on these kind of investments. And, you know, I even stopped at Clifton Sanitation yesterday and said, hey, is this in your area? Can you service this? No, we're not servicing that. So that falls back on the city, Persigo, to put sewer and water in there, which runs every development. You gotta have the sewer and water in there. There's no power in there. And what happened down at Dos Rios, if you're not familiar with it, is that we put $10 million of infrastructure in there on a handshake deal as a co-signer on a $10 million bond that put that infrastructure in for the developer out of Fort Collins to pay that bond off because he is going to sell the properties, put in boutique hotels, and have all that sort of thing. Well, in August, they told us they could not make their payment. So it's a non-performing investment for the city right now down there. So not only are we short
into default.
So not only are we short on capital funds that we're going to be spending more on with this thing, but we're short $1 million on that bonding thing down at Dos Rios. Is going to be our payment, and we're short $1 million on the cannabis towards the rec center because the cannabis places are not paying enough taxes according to the budget for the rec center. So we got $2 more million to cover there. Now, you know, it doesn't sound like a lot of money these days, $1 million here, but that's all we got to work with. And we can multiply those funds by bonding out stuff. But we aren't going to be able to, and we're getting very close to our bonding capacity too. There hasn't been much discussion about that. Is that our bonding capacity is kind of hitting the ceiling where would no longer be a 2A bonds. You know, we would be going into stretching it, especially with flat growth projected for the next 5-10 years. You know, we have people moving in. They're mostly retirees without kids, so they're, you know, buying places for cash. They spend about 1/3 of the money that a family does on sales tax, so they're not going to help our sales tax situation much. And so, you know, there's kind of a perfect storm circling around financially right here, and we should really pause, and we should really take a breath and step back from this and make some real plans and that are well financed, well thought out. Previously, they had done a study, and there was 3 options for connecting to the interstate on that, and this was considered the acceptable one, not the best one, but the acceptable one. So anyway, I mean, there's lots of challenges, and I wish more